press play on a video, that's it. One tap, one click. And in the fraction of a second before the first frame appears, a delivery system spanning thousands of miles springs into action, negotiating, measuring, adapting, recovering, doing more work in those first few seconds than most people do in an hour. All of these mechanisms running simultaneously, interacting with each other, each one compensating for the other's limitations, collectively producing something that feels effortless when it works and mystifying when it doesn't. Let's watch it all happen at once. The moment you press play, your device needs to establish a connection to the server hosting the video. This isn't instantaneous, it requires a handshake. Your device sends a message, "I want to connect." The server responds, "I'm ready." Your device confirms, connection established. 3 messages, 1 round trip each way, before a single byte of video data has moved. This handshake is TCP establishing its delivery contract. Both sides are agreeing on sequence numbers, the counters that will track every byte and enable the receiver to detect loss, reorder out-of-sequence data, and verify completeness. They're also negotiating window sizes, how much data can be in flight at once before the sender has to wait for acknowledgements. Right from the start, delivery is not passive. It's an active negotiation between 2 systems agreeing on the terms of their communication. Now the server begins sending video data, but it doesn't immediately send at full speed. It can't. It has no idea how much capacity the network between it and your device can carry. A fast server connected by a high-capacity link doesn't help if there's a congested router somewhere in the middle of the path that can only handle a fraction of that capacity. So TCP starts conservatively, in slow start, sending a small amount, watching for acknowledgements, doubling its sending rate with each round trip. The video data begins trickling in, then flowing faster, then faster still. If you've ever noticed a video load slowly for the first second or two before snapping into full quality, this is why. TCP is discovering the path's capacity from scratch, cautiously, before committing to a high sending rate. Within a few seconds, something interesting happens. Your device has been receiving data and buffering it, storing incoming video ahead of the playback position. The buffer exists for a reason we've already seen: jitter. Individual packets don't arrive with perfectly consistent spacing. Some arrive slightly early, some slightly late, some need to be retransmitted and arrive later still. If the player displayed each frame the instant it arrived, the video would stutter, playing at irregular intervals that follow the network's timing rather than the content's intended frame rate. The buffer absorbs that irregularity. The player reads from the buffer at a steady, consistent rate, 24 frames per second, or 30, or 60, whatever the content requires. The network delivers at a variable rate. The buffer sits between them, converting variable delivery into steady playback. Watch the buffer level carefully next time you stream a video. Most streaming players show it as the lighter-colored bar, extending ahead of your current playback position. That bar is your margin, how far ahead of the playback position the delivery system has gotten. A large margin means plenty of buffer, stable playback, tolerance for network hiccups. A shrinking margin means delivery is barely keeping up with playback. When it reaches 0, the video freezes, not because the network failed completely, but because delivery momentarily fell behind and the buffer was exhausted. This is partial delivery in its most visible form. Not a corrupted file or a truncated response, just a stream that isn't arriving fast enough to sustain continuous playback. The system's response is to pause and wait, to let the buffer rebuild before resuming. Meanwhile, TCP's congestion control is continuously at work, probing the available capacity. The sending rate grows steadily until a packet is dropped somewhere along the path. A router, overwhelmed by traffic from many connections simultaneously, discards the packet rather than queue it indefinitely. TCP detects the loss, the acknowledgement doesn't arrive, and cuts its sending rate back, then begins probing upward again. This cycle, grow, detect loss, cut back, grow again, runs continuously for the entire duration of your video. The sending rate oscillates around the available capacity, always searching for the ceiling, always retreating when it finds it. For your video player, this looks like quality fluctuations. Modern streaming services use adaptive bitrate streaming. a technique where the video is encoded at multiple quality levels simultaneously. The player continuously monitors how fast data is arriving and chooses the quality level that the current delivery rate can sustain. When TCP's sending rate is high and the buffer is full, the player requests higher quality segments, sharper image, better audio. When the rate drops after a congestion event, the player steps down to a lower quality level that requires less data per second. This is why streaming video quality changes dynamically, sometimes subtly, sometimes obviously. It's not random. It's the delivery layer communicating its current capacity to the application layer, and the application adapting intelligently to what the network can provide in real time. Now let's introduce a complication that reveals the ordering and duplication mechanisms we've explored. Partway through your video, a brief network disruption causes 3 packets to be lost. TCP detects the loss through missing acknowledgements and duplicate acknowledgement signals from the receiver, which indicate that data arrived after the gap, but the gap itself hasn't been filled. TCP retransmits the missing segments. While those retransmissions are in flight, subsequent packets that were already sent continue arriving at the receiver. They arrive out of order, later packets arriving before the retransmitted earlier ones. TCP's receiver holds them in its buffer, ordered by sequence number, waiting for the gap to be filled. The retransmitted packets arrive. TCP fills the gap. The complete, correctly ordered data is delivered to the video player. The player never knew there was a gap. From its perspective, a continuous stream of correctly ordered video data arrived, perhaps with a brief slowdown, but without interruption. This is the ordering and acknowledgement mechanisms working together, sequence numbers detecting the gap, retransmission filling it, buffering, holding subsequent data until the gap is resolved, the application seeing none of the complexity underneath. What the player does experience is a brief reduction in available data. While the retransmission was happening, new data wasn't arriving. The buffer level dipped. If the buffer was small, the video might have paused briefly. If it was large, the dip was absorbed entirely and playback continued without interruption. The buffer, again, is the shock absorber between an imperfect delivery system and an application that needs smooth, continuous data. Now consider what happens when the connection itself fails, when the network path is interrupted entirely, not just briefly degraded. The video freezes. The player is no longer receiving data. It displays what it has buffered and waits. TCP, detecting that acknowledgements have stopped arriving, attempts retransmission. The retransmissions also go unanswered, not because specific packets were lost, but because the entire path is broken. TCP's retransmission timer fires. It retransmits. No response. The timer backs off. Each retransmission waits longer than the last, exponentially, following the same back-off logic we've seen in other contexts. TCP is giving the network time to recover rather than flooding it with retransmissions that will also be lost. Meanwhile, the player's buffer is depleting. The question is whether the buffer lasts long enough for TCP to either recover the connection or for the player to detect the failure and take action. Most streaming players have a maximum wait time, a timeout, after which they report an error rather than waiting indefinitely. If the network recovers quickly, if this was a brief interruption, TCP re-establishes the path, retransmitted segments arrive, the buffer refills, and playback resumes. If the network doesn't recover, the timeout fires. The player reports a failure. You see an error message. The timeout isn't a sign the system gave up too easily. It's the system making a reasonable judgment that silence lasting this long is more likely total failure than extreme delay, and that reporting an error and letting you take action is more useful than waiting forever. Every mechanism we've covered in this series was present in that video playback. Not sequentially, simultaneously, all running at once, interacting with each other, each one handling the specific failure mode it was designed for, all of them together producing an experience that feels, when it works, like simply watching a video. This is what delivery is, not a single protocol, not a single mechanism, but a layered system of guarantees and compensations, each layer addressing a specific failure mode of the layer beneath it. The network drops packets. Acknowledgement and retransmission catch the drops. The retransmissions introduce delay. Buffers absorb the delay. The buffers introduce their own latency. Adaptive systems tune buffer sizes dynamically. The network has variable capacity. Congestion control probes for it continuously. The probing causes rate fluctuations. Adaptive bitrate smooths the fluctuations. Connections break. Timeouts bound the waiting. Retries attempt recovery. Retries risk duplication. Idempotency makes duplication harmless. Every mechanism exists because another mechanism has a limitation. The system works not because any individual component is perfect, but because the imperfections are anticipated, the failure modes are known, and there's always another layer handling what the layer below couldn't. When you press play and a video loads smoothly, instantly, in high quality, without a stutter, you're seeing the product of decades of engineering layered on top of a network that was never designed to guarantee any of it. The network delivers packets, best effort, no promises. Everything else is built on top of that honest, imperfect foundation. That's delivery.